Welcome to In Focus with Ejaz Haider. We have one big story tonight, and it's about India's state-sponsored terrorism against Pakistan. Last Saturday, in a joint presser, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi and Director General Inter-Services Public Relations gave a detailed briefing to the media on how India is fomenting terrorism, facilitating, funding, and in some cases training terrorist groups to attack targets in Pakistan. The briefing gave several examples of how this is being done. Phone call intercepts, bank transactions through third countries, target identification, and much else was revealed. Pakistan has put together a dossier on these subversive and terrorist activities and has decided to share it with the United Nations General Secretary's office, as well as with other relevant world capitals. Earlier, in March 2016, Pakistan had captured a serving Indian naval officer working with Research and Analysis Wing, India's external intelligence agency, from Balochistan. Jadhav confessed to working for R&AW, was tried in a military court and sentenced to death. So important was Jadhav that India took the case to the International Court of Justice on the issue of consular access. Last month, in an interview to an Indian media channel, Dr. Moeed Yusuf, Special Assistant to the Prime Minister on National Security and Chairman Strategic Policy Planning, had spoken about Indian terrorist activities. Now we have the dossier. Let's take our discussion forward, starting with FATF, the Financial Action Task Force. At the presser, the Foreign Minister talked about how India has been trying to sabotage the China-Pakistan economic corridor and Pakistan's economy by using FATF to get Pakistan blacklisted. But before we go further, let's see how FATF defines itself and its remit. And this straight from FATF's own website. And I quote, "The Financial Action Task Force is the global money laundering and terrorist financing watchdog. The intergovernmental body sets international standards that aim to prevent these illegal activities and the harm they cause to society. As a policy-making body, the FATF works to generate the necessary political will to bring about national legislative and regulatory reforms in these areas, with more than 200 countries and jurisdictions committed to implementing them. The FATF has developed the FATF recommendations or FATF standards, which ensure a coordinated global response to prevent organized crime, corruption, and terrorism. They help authorities to go after the money of criminals dealing in illegal drugs, human trafficking, and other crimes. The FATF also works to stop funding for weapons of mass destruction. The FATF reviews money laundering and terrorist financing techniques and continuously strengthens its standards to address new risks, such as the regulation of virtual assets, which have spread as cryptocurrencies gain popularity. The FATF monitors countries to ensure they implement the FATF standards fully and effectively and holds countries to account that do not comply." To discuss Pakistan's review rounds at FATF, I'm joined by Dr. Miftah Ismail, former finance minister in the Pakistan Muslim League government. Thank you for your time, Miftah. I especially wanted to get your take on this because you actually got thrown into this FATF and immediately after getting the finance portfolio. Give us your sense of how India has been using FATF to push its anti-Pakistan agenda.
First of all, I think that we need to be very clear with our listeners and viewers that FATF really is a Western tool, or a Western organization, which basically is a political organization masquerading as a technical forum. But essentially, all decisions in FATF are actually made based on political leanings of the Western countries at that time, extent at the time. So that any action they take against Pakistan or any number of countries basically are due to political reasons. That said, every Western country is a member of FATF, has one vote. For instance, Luxembourg has one vote. And mostly Muslim countries are absent from it. Indonesia doesn't have a vote. Pakistan doesn't have a vote. Turkey, thankfully, has a vote. GCC as a whole has a vote. But mostly Muslim countries, African countries, poor countries, Asian countries are ignored by it. And Pakistan is not even a member of FATF. We are actually a member of Asia Pacific Group, which in turn is a subsidiary of FATF. And FATF, like I said, it basically allows Western countries to impose their political will on poorer countries, Asian countries, based on whatever the politics of the moment is. India has done a good job in FATF, aligning itself with the Western powers. But really, what got Pakistan into the grey list last time around was not just India. India doesn't have really the pull and the power that, for instance, the US has and other Western countries have. So these four Western countries, US, Germany, England, France, they sort of, if you will, ganged up against Pakistan, and then they decided to push us into grey list. I think they wanted to push us into blacklist, but somehow we survived that. And India was just basically, on the sidelines applauding and a beneficiary of it. And certainly India produces documents and speeches, etc., and lobbies these Western countries again and again against Pakistan. But really, the last time around, it was the US and other Western countries that had decided to move against Pakistan that got us into the grey list.
Right. Now, I agree with you, because at the time when you went to Paris and you had to face the full brunt of this, there was this, joint sort of operation, as you mentioned, the US, the UK, France, and Germany. But the foreign minister has also produced at the presser, and I'm sure you watched the presser, letters written by Indian missions lobbying, as you said. So there seems to be an active effort on India's part to keep the heat on Pakistan as far as the FATF framework is concerned.
So I want to congratulate the Foreign Office and ISPR for, I think, a very good dossier listing all the terrorist activities that India coordinates, finances, and instigate in Pakistan. And I've always asked this question, to people that, whatever money laundering goes on, Hawala and Hundi goes on in Pakistan, much more so goes on in India. I mean, just the cricket betting market in India has more money laundering than all money laundering in Pakistan. But for them to single out Pakistan and leave out countries like Bangladesh, India, and so many others, in Myanmar, for instance, and just to single out Pakistan, is obviously betrays, I think, their intentions. But that said, look, we have to be part of the international community, and we can't change the rules of the whole world, and we still have to do our best. I think this idea that the Foreign Office and the ISPR coming up with the list of Indian terrorist activities, I think that should hold us in good stead. We have to make this more pronounced. I'll be very honest with you, I went to every Western capital that I could. We really tried to do a PR blitz just before the FATF thing last year, in 2018. But we were not getting too much sympathy from Western capitals or even capital of Islamic countries, save Turkey. And the reason is that a lot of people bought this Indian narrative that Pakistan had been sponsoring stuff across the border in Kashmir and elsewhere, and those guys had also done their lobbying work. This is the first time that we are now making a concerted effort at counter-attacking the Indian narrative and showing them the stuff that India has done in Afghanistan, the terror that they instigate in Balochistan and elsewhere in Pakistan. And I think that I think it's probably a better strategy to actually show India for what it is, rather than trying to defend Pakistan, or saying that we are innocent. I think the better is to show that India is complicit in instigating terror in Pakistan.
Right. Now, Dr. Ismail, you trained as an economist. You held the finance portfolio. You also a very successful business person, so you know the real economy also. And you know everything about regulation and tariffs and taxes and the rest of it. Now, it's very interesting that you mentioned that FATF is used by various Western countries for political purposes. Even as FATF, as I mentioned, I know that this was deliberate because I wanted to present to the viewers what FATF claims to be. It claims to be a technical regulatory body. But from what you are saying, it seems to me that perhaps our legislation and our regulations are perhaps even tougher than some of the countries that are the founding members of FATF.
Yes, and it's how they interpret their own laws. I mean, I'll give you an example, for instance, that when they talk about terror financing or when they talk about money laundering, they never concentrate on the originating countries. Typically, monies flow from Western countries into poorer Asian countries. Let's say a hawala or a transaction or coming from England to Pakistan. So they will never go after, the money changers in England who have actually originated this, the money transfer. But they will only go after the authorities in Pakistan that why are you not keeping track, or who's sending the money and why is any money being sent? Which is fine, but that's a very asymmetric implementation of their own laws. They're not worried about the originating countries. They're only worried about the terminating or receiving countries, and that's a very discriminatory attitude. When they talk about, for instance, money flowing from Pakistan to Afghanistan. They talk about that, but they don't talk about the fact that a lot of drugs flow from Afghanistan into Pakistan and then into the Western markets. And if it weren't such a huge demand of opium and other heroin and other drugs in the Western countries, a lot of this monies wouldn't be flowing this way. And you have a few thousand American troops in Afghanistan, and yet nobody sort of questions what is it that the U.S. troops are doing and why is Afghanistan having record poppy growth every year after year, and how can Pakistan then prevent the transfer of money if you can't prevent the growing of opium? So obviously this is a very asymmetric implementation of their own laws. This is a very asymmetric understanding of their own laws. Nobody seriously believes that there is more money laundering in Pakistan compared to India or Bangladesh or other countries. A lot of these, not fully documented economies have a lot of transactions take place, which you can term as money laundering, but that's just money transfers. And there is no bar in England and Western countries to transfer money to Pakistan and to other countries, and they don't really look at those transactions. So it is a one-way implementation, but it has to be said that this is a political organization, and it's not just a technical forum.
Right. Thank you so much. That was Dr. Miftah Ismail, former finance minister of Pakistan, speaking with us. I am also joined by Senator Anwarul Haq Kakar from Balochistan. But here's the thing, Senator Kakar is not just a senator, he's someone who also is an analyst who has been watching the happenings in Balochistan and in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and erstwhile federally administered tribal areas for a very long time, has been speaking about it, has been writing about it. Anwar, thank you so much for joining me. Of course, on this program, we have talked about Indian state-sponsored terrorism before also, but now, mercifully, I would say, we have actually, at the highest levels of the government, decided to put together a dossier, decided to make certain public revelations. And I think that's a great step to take. Give me your sense of how this would be beneficial to Pakistan, and give us also a sense of the terrorist activities in Balochistan.
To be honest with you, there was a very serious story from our side to tell the rest of the world. And in the past, probably we have failed to enunciate, to articulate what was happening. You look at what happened at APS. If that, God forbid, APS would have happened either on the European continent or American continent, the whole planet would be in fire, it would ablaze. But what happened to us, that yes, it did develop a national response as far as Pakistan is concerned. But if you look at the international attention, if you look at the international sympathy as a victim of the terrorism, being a society, being a state was concerned, most probably not up to the mark. Whether it was our failure or whether it was the failure of the global conscience, that they did not recognize the gravity of the situation, the seriousness of the situation. We have lost more or less 90,000 individuals. 90,000 families, 90,000 lives, women, children, men and old, young, and all of them appearing that as far as the global public opinion is concerned, that their life is going in vain because we are not talking about it. We are not telling the world enough. So I think this last presser was the first step in the right direction. And the more important thing is that we should repetition is the key, be it in our media, be it from our civil society, be it from our parliamentarians or other officials which are involved in these sort of activities, that they should keep on telling and remind the world that what Pakistan has gone through. It's not just about 136 or 140 billion dollars which we have lost. It's 90,000 human beings. People like Shabana, the constable which lost her life in Swat. People like Sifat Ghayur. People like Malak Saad, Abid Ali. People like General Sarallah Abbasi. People like many last nights, which probably I'm not naming them now. We should start naming these heroes. And the kind of which they are being held in every household of Pakistan. And world should know that they were not just names. They were human beings who had loved ones, who have lost their loved ones, and there is a deep emotional trauma and scars on the collective memory of Pakistani society. And that's how Pakistani society is responding to that. And main player which has brought Pakistan into this situation is unfortunately the state of India. India has chosen as a state that it would use terrorism as a tool for its strategic advancement. And when a state decides that, when its exchequers and its the people who are paying their taxes, their money is being used to kill innocent people in the neighborhood, that is a blot. That blot should be brought in as a sense of shame to the Indian conscience, and it should be brought in at the national and international level. And this masquerading of Indian democracy and this mask of human and universal values which they cheer up so much at all global stage, it should be unmasked, and their real face where their taxpayers' money has been spent in spilling the blood of innocent and unarmed citizenry in the neighborhood should be exposed wherever we get the opportunity.
Absolutely. Now, here's the brass, which is now this amalgam of 3 or 4 Baloch terrorist groups. They have been putting out videos, they have been claiming responsibility. So as far as their actions are concerned, there's absolutely no doubt about those actions. But it seems that the good thing with this dossier is that their actions have been, we have found connections between their actions and the funding and the facilitation coming from India. So give us a sense of that in terms of how significant that is.
Ejaz, brass, as you have mentioned yourself, it's an amalgamation of different groups, BLF, BLA, BRA, and these organizations are being directly funded by RAW. We know it through the confession of Mr. Riyadov. Along with him, their own activists and their own combatants, which has been apprehended by the law enforcement agencies, they have also confided a lot. So we have got a lot of information and intelligence pictures do emerge that what they are up to. What they do, that they eliminate and target the Baloch who do not agree and subscribe to their political ideas and who wants to have a parliamentary or a political role in Pakistan's normal constitutional activities. The non-ethnic Baloch, who happens to be either Punjabi or Urdu speaking or anyone, they are being specifically targeted. The Pashtuns and the rest, anyone. A Baloch who do not subscribe to their militant political view is an enemy, is a traitor, according to their definition. And this kind of extremism is being encouraged by these groups, and particularly now as they have the RSS behind their state strength. So they do encourage what happened in erstwhile East Pakistan. We should not forget that ethnic extremism was pushed to its far end, and that far end, along with the military intervention by the Indians, has craved out a new geographical entity by the name of Bangladesh. So these are the kind of the blueprints which is in their mind, and which they want to try to create and recreate new geographical entities within the existing territorial structure of Pakistan.
Right. One final question, Anwar. There are certain voices in Pakistan that basically say that they're very skeptical of what the state says. They also talk about rights and the rest of it in Balochistan. And they say, or they propagate, that the Baloch are a suppressed, oppressed ethnic group. Now, since you belong to Balochistan yourself, although you're a Pashtun, give me a sense of this approach by some of the people and what the reality behind that is.
The unfortunate part is that these groups, they do not recognize Mr. Fazal Bari, who was English teacher in Tamil College in Quetta and was gunned down by these thugs, by these terrorists. They are not aware of Nazma Talib, who happened to be the lecturer of mass communication at Balochistan University. They are not aware of the teachers who were there in the town of Masung and teaching Baloch kids either in English language or other subjects, and they were merely targeted because of their ethnicity. So this kind of fascist tendencies which these outfits have exhibited in the town of either Quetta or the rest of the Balochistan, unfortunately has not got the kind of a press it deserved. They deserve to have been exposed more. On contrary, and ironically, probably there is an imbalance in civil-military relationship in this country, and mostly the liberal Pakistan took this fascism as a struggle against the Pakistan armed forces, without realizing and divorcing that they were the one who have targeted the innocent citizen, the non-combatant, the unarmed citizens of the province and the country, which had no role whatsoever if there is any so-called exploitation of the Baloch ethnic group. Though I do not subscribe to that either. I mean, Baloch has got a deal which is a package in this country. Baloch has been to the position of the Prime Minister in the shape of Mr. Zamir Jamali just on the basis of his ethnicity. Baloch has reached the position of Chairman Senate in case of Mr. Sadiq Sanjani primarily because of ethnicity as a Baloch. Baloch has got the biggest share, being a chief minister of its largest province in the shape of Usman Buzdar. Baloch has taken the position of one of the strongest president in shape of Farooq Laghari, who was Tumandar. So Baloch has not been as marginalized in this country as probably some people would like to think about it. They have been part and parcel of this state structure and state apparatus. Yes, there are classes, and there is an advantageous class in the Baloch ethnicity, and there is a disadvantageous class in the Baloch ethnicity, as in the rest of the ethnicities, be it Pashtuns, be it Punjabis, be it Sindhis. So it's a matter of more of a class rather than ethnicity, as being thought by rest of my many countrymen.
Right. Thank you so much. That was Senator Anwar Kakar speaking with us. We shall take a short break and return to continue with our discussion of India's state-sponsored terrorism against Pakistan. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus. Our big story continues: India's state-sponsored terrorism against Pakistan. Last Saturday, in a joint presser, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi and Director General Inter-Services Public Relations gave a detailed briefing to the media on how India is fomenting terrorism, facilitating, funding, and in some cases training terrorist groups to attack targets in Pakistan. To carry forward our discussion, I'm joined by Ambassador Akram, a former Foreign Service officer who has held various diplomatic assignments in Pakistan's missions abroad, and Jamal Aziz, who's Executive Director of Research Society for International Law. Thank you to both panelists. Let me begin with Ambassador Akram here. Ambassador Akram, we have been talking about this. Of course, we've been writing about this. We got hold of serving naval officer, Commander Kulbhushan Jadhav from Balochistan. But there was a sense of, our being a little apologetic or indirect about these activities. Now, that has come to an end on Saturday with this dossier and a public briefing. Give me a sense of what could be the strategic objective of, making all this public.
I think the objective is very clear in the sense that you rightly pointed out that we were in the past very reticent and perhaps followed a low-key approach to this issue. It was not very coordinated. This is the first time that we have taken this issue up at a very high level. It is very comprehensive. And the dossier that I have seen contains specific substantive information on the basis of which we need to follow up. And I think the important thing will be to sustain this campaign. And the objective of the campaign, I think finally we have come to the point where we want to expose in a comprehensive and coordinated way the acts of terrorism that India has been promoting against Pakistan, essentially through 3 or 4 key areas against CPAC in Balochistan and in our major cities. So this is, in my view, a very important step. And the objective is clearly to expose India's activities promoting and sponsoring terrorism directly within Pakistan and through our neighboring country. So I think this is a very important step forward.
Right. I'm going to question to Jamal also, but let me first ask you this question and get your take on this. Now, the critics within Pakistan after the presser have been raising a couple of points. One, for instance, they say there is, in the murky world of espionage, it's very difficult that whatever evidence that you have is irrefutable. So that's one. Then some people have also said that this is more for domestic consumption. It's not going to really stick with the Western capitals because of India's clout, diplomatic clout, and the rest of it. And thirdly, they also say, well, India is simply going to reject this and produce its own sort of litany of charges against Pakistan. So how do you, if you were to respond to this criticism, how would you formulate your response?
People can have their views. I don't have a problem with having people having different views. The important thing for me is that we need to move forward on this issue. And as I said before, in the past we had been reticent about it. And now I think the decision is to move aggressively on this issue. And this needs to be taken. Obviously, the Indians will oppose it or reject it, which is to be expected. But that shouldn't stop us from what we have done. And we should take this forward, as I said, and I think we need to address it through different capitals, through our missions in different capitals, through the United Nations, in the United Nations Committee, the Security Council's Terrorism Committee, in the FATF. All these organizations are available to us to present our case and to put forward the evidence, and especially with countries that we believe can be helpful and useful, and those also who have been critical of Pakistan. In particular, I have in mind the United States. The evidence that I have seen and the evidence that has been put forward is irrefutable. It cannot be denied. I mean, there is specifics There are specific. So people who want to reject this or need to or counter this, they need to come up with specific responses that this information is incorrect. And I think that they would be hard pressed to find that kind of counter evidence to negate what has been put forward, because there are names, their account numbers, their telephone numbers, their individuals, there are places exactly where these bases exist, etc. So these kind of hard facts are in my view irrefutable, and those who want to challenge them need to come up with evidence to show that this is not correct.
Right. Stay with me, Ambassador Akram. Let me pull in Jamal Aziz here. Jamal, people like yourself, experts in international law and other legal experts, are going to become very useful in the coming days as far as this dossier is concerned. So give me your reading of it, and tell our viewers how significant legally it is or can be for Pakistan's case.
Thank you, Jasam. I think, speaking purely from a legal perspective, the developments of the past 2 days are extremely significant. They could not be more significant. And as a lawyer, the possibilities that this opens up legally for Pakistan to augment its diplomatic and financial statecraft on this, the possibilities are multifaceted. I think we need to, first of all, I think a lot of the domestic criticism which you were alluding to reflects a very defeatist mindset. Definitely diplomatic and political considerations are there, but we have to understand that the Indians, when they built this narrative that Pakistan is a state sponsor of terrorism, that narrative did not develop overnight. They were plugging away consistently at it and utilizing all the mechanisms available to it under international law under the radar for the past 20 years. You would recall that after the 2001 Parliament attack, they moved for the designation of Hafiz Saeed for 7 years before the designation process went through. So I think that there are so many options available to us. Ambassador Zamir Akram pointed out under the UNSC framework, especially the designation. Pakistan now needs to move ahead and try to make sure that designations take place under the Security Council framework, especially the Al-Qaeda, Taliban, Daesh committee, under which the TTP and Jamaat-ul-Ahrar have already been listed for many years on that list. So the evidences that they have been built, that has been presented, you can add Afghan and Indian individuals and nationals and entities onto this list, and along with a range of other measures, which I think, allow you to ask me in further questions.
Ambassador Akram has also talked significantly enough, talked about the Financial Action Task Force. Earlier on the program, I had Dr. Miftah Ismail, and because he dealt, as the finance minister, dealt directly with these FATF, proceedings, and he said to me that, a number of Western countries use this forum, not particularly for technical regulatory, part of it, but for political reasons. Now, with this kind of dossier, what can we do with reference to India? Now, considering that India is a member of FATF, whereas we are associates under the Asia-Pacific group, so India already has a leg up on us as far as FATF is concerned. But what can we get out of this dossier at that forum where India has tried its best to, get us blacklisted?
So, Jasad, thank you for that question. First of all, the dossier by itself is not the end product. We have to understand that Pakistan has a lot of more homework to do. The dossier provides you with intelligence material. Now, different subsequent dossiers, memorandums and notes and opinions and academic literature has to be built around this dossier. So speaking from a legal perspective on FATF, yes, Pakistan is not a member of FATF, but we are a member of the Asia-Pacific group. India and Afghanistan are also members of the Asia-Pacific group as well. We need to highlight the fact that how did Indian supervisory and regulatory authorities why were they not able to detect these transactions? So we need to highlight the regulatory failures that took place and push for revised mutual evaluation reports and assessments conducted for Afghanistan and India, because clearly their processes seem not to have been working effectively. So, for example, in Afghanistan, their last mutual evaluation report has taken place in 2011. I think it's high time that a new evaluation report takes place on that as well. Then subsequently memos and memorandums have to be made by Pakistan addressed to all the 38 FATF members and the various international organizations that are a part of FATF, and highlight the specific violations of technical compliance which have taken place in this instance. For example, correspondent banking. How was it that Indian banks were able to utilize this evidence, utilize these channels for providing funding in Afghanistan? Interestingly, we need to also focus on the liability, the civil liability of Indian banks in this. The US FinCEN report that came out had alluded to the Punjab National Bank. And I think our dossier also refers to the Punjab National Bank. So we need to follow up. We need to follow up with FinCEN. The mechanisms under Pakistani law, the Financial Monitoring Unit, for example, needs to engage with FinCEN. And the fact that dollar-denominated transactions have taken place potentially attracts the jurisdiction of the US Department of Justice and the US Treasury as well. So there are, like I said, a range of options available to us, and we need to keep plugging away and developing additional material, additional evidences, and utilize the wide spectrum of options available to us under international law.
Absolutely. Thank you. That was Jamal Aziz speaking with us. Before I wrap up, let me go back to Ambassador Akram here. Ambassador Akram, so Jamal Aziz is basically arguing that in terms of legal actions, there are multiple, avenues available to us and multiple strategies that we can utilize, and not necessarily sequentially, but simultaneously. Any thoughts about that before I wrap up?
Well, like I said, this is the first important step. But there are several follow-up actions that will need to be taken, and Mr. Jamal Aziz has identified most of the important areas where we will need to work, and you're right to say that we will need to do it simultaneously. But an important element of this will, of course, be diplomatic outreach. Not just to the UN, but also bilaterally to important countries. Remember one thing, that the Indians were able to push their narrative against Pakistan considerably with the help of the US. And at one point, and perhaps even now, there is this convergence between these two countries against so-called Islamic terrorism or Muslim terrorism. So that kind of weight that we need at the international level will need to come from some of our friends as well, who are part, and I would say very openly that one of the countries that is also a victim of this Indian-sponsored terrorism in Pakistan is China, because CPEC is being targeted. The Chinese consulate in Karachi was targeted. So they also have an interest, and we need to work with countries that have an interest in addressing these issues. And I'm sure that over time, this will obviously take time, and there are challenges. We should be the first to recognize that there will be challenges. But this is not a one-off. This is, as I keep saying, a first important step. The important thing is we have taken a decision to pursue this course of action.
Absolutely.
In a focused way.
Absolutely. Follow-ups, what matters. Thank you so much. That was Ambassador Zamir Akram speaking with us. This is all from In Focus tonight. We shall see you tomorrow at the same time. Keep following our latest updates on social media at indus.news. Good night and goodbye.